Uh, John, I've just now connected you as a panelist. Are you there? John, tell us.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant.
Good
Okay.
afternoon, all. So it seems that there was an additional barrier to get into the WebEx today from one of the routes in, one of the links, it seems, didn't make it that easy. So that may explain why there's not so many people logged in
Okay.
yet. Given that we haven't got much time, John, I trust your intuition. My sense is it may be worth sort of proceeding quite swiftly,
Yeah.
but maybe give it another moment.
So I will get started, and then by the time I finish my little bit, we'll then be able to hand over to John, who will lead us into the next session, and then be able to follow up on the post session. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet another AI community session looking at health and social care. This is May's session. I'd like to thank everybody that's able to join us today and those who are following up on the YouTube videos and connecting on Twitter and other social media channels. For those of you who are the first time joining us, we tried to make this session as interactive as possible, so please don't be shy. We tried to use the chat box, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you're connected onto a desktop. And there's multiple ways of doing this. You can either chat in the chat box, or we can unmute you to say hello and connect through a voice. But as just a reminder, just because usually the chat goes quite fast, loads of different people are saying different things. So if you're writing a response, if you can include the person's name that you're responding to, if it's something simple as, you know, if I'm writing about a particular subject, you can say, @Dom, thank you very much, here's some relevant information, and I can reply back to you, just so that we can keep a better flow through on the conversations that are happening throughout the next hour. Today, it's myself, John, and Sophie. I'd like to introduce Sophie to the team as well. Sophie's been helping us coordinate and organize a number of things. John and Sophie, do you want to say hello?
Hello.
That's a lovely hello. John?
Thanks, Tom. Hi, guys. Hi.
Brilliant. And just so we can get the conversation going, just to show what we're trying to do, make it a little bit more interactive, I'm going to give people the privilege rights to be able to annotate over this screen. So over on the top left-hand corner, you should now see a arrow, a T letter, and some other icons. With that, you can just say where you're calling from, where you're working. However, you're not in the British Isles, please feel free to point elsewhere. If you're struggling with that, let me know. Great. So why are we here? Well, when we talk about artificial intelligence, and we're having a conversation about this with our colleagues, we're just creating a space where we can have people come together on a regular basis and start sharing some learning. And that's one of the reasons why this community was set up. This Chip Bell quote is one of my favorites about, you know, if we take care of the relationships, the results will follow. You know, if we manage to work on our relationships and build across communities, across multiple sectors of health and social care, we'll be able to get better results. And a piece of research by an organization, by Innovisor, is one that I'm particularly fond of. For those of you who have not seen this before, it talks about the fact that just 3% of people within an organization typically drive the 85% of the other conversations. And I think that's really important about what we're trying to do here, is working together, finding the influencers in the conversation so that we can disseminate the knowledge across our organizations in a more coherent way. I look forward to working with a number of you who I know are quite actively trying to do that, not only in your own organization, but across the health and social care landscape. And one of the reasons that we do this as a virtual community over WebEx is that this research by Nick Milton proves that social connection and discussions is 14 times more effective than written word. there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with toolkits and research documents, and many of our colleagues are working on such things. But being able to disseminate that knowledge in a social way really amplifies people's way of being able to retain that information. Just to give you some examples, I don't know, Melissa, are you there? Are you able to, if I unmute you for a second? Just
yes, I'm there.
What the network is up to and where you've got up to with your survey.
Of course. So I am Melissa Ream, and I am working at Kent Surrey Sussex Academic Health Science Network. And we're here in support of the AI community and hoping to promote that across the AHSN network as well. In addition, we are looking to promote the development of an ecosystem across AI in health and care, and that includes citizens themselves, but also industry groups and providers, commissioners, charities working in the area, academics, etc. And in order to do that, we are looking to make a go-to directory of AI projects and companies in health and care. And this will be available via an interactive map on our publicly available AHSN microsite. And in addition, while we're collecting that information, we're also looking for a bit of thought leadership. So we've got a bit of a thought leadership survey to give out as well. And we're hoping to find out more about enablers and barriers to promoting AI and a responsible, ethical use of AI in health and care. So to that end, we've had a really good core advisory group supporting us, including some of the people who are on this call today, and we appreciate that. We're looking to put the questionnaire up live next week after the bank holiday, and we're hoping to get a lot of support for that. So be on the lookout for that. We will definitely publicize via this network. And then in addition, we will be launching our interactive map and the results of the questionnaire, hopefully with some profiles. So what's good out there, what's really good practice, what are some of the good solutions, and who are some of the people who are game changers in the area of AI, and particularly looking at diagnostics in the first instance. So I welcome you all to join us in that, and be on the lookout next week for the link.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Dom.
Melissa, and thanks for your hard work on that. One other thing I want to bring your attention to is the Future Advocacy and Wellcome Trust report that come out this week about ethical, social, and political challenges of AI. We had the privilege of Matthew joining one of our sessions talking about this. So their report has now been launched, and I'm sure he'd be very much welcome to your input as to what you managed to find in that report. Another announcement that has been released in the last week or so is that the Wellcome Trust are also commissioning a number of funded research projects, which is an absolutely worth and welcome addition to what's currently happening in the system. Before I hand over to John Ainsworth, who's going to talk about the democratization of artificial intelligence, I just wanted to hand over to John and Sophie about some of the work that they're doing off the back of this community as well.
Great, thank you. So something we are looking at doing, or in the process of doing, is setting up a very basic website to really list a number of resources around healthcare, health and social care AI. So the purpose of this is really to sort of encourage conversation, but also try and be a sort of one-stop shop, really, to information. So anything from sort of research to sort of magazine articles and what have you. Melissa, at some point, it might be really, really helpful to have a chat just to make sure we're not sort of crossing purposes in any way. In addition, so with that, we're at a very, very early stage. If we happen to have any volunteers who could help either sort of help us populate the website or help us identify kind of additional resources we might want to include, that would be really helpful. What we are planning to do is have a chat at 1 p.m. Friday. So I'll put in my email address and you can email me if you're able to join in on that, or email me anyway if you are interested in engaging in some way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sophie. So now it's just gone after 10 past 1. I want to hand over now to Professor John Ainsworth. It looks like I forgot to edit the Twitter handle, so apologies about that, John.
Not me.
That's not you. That's John. That's Matt from the last session. I'm just going to hand over presenter rights now to you, so you should be able to take over and land on your presentation. I think we all welcome John's conversation today about the democratization of AI and the empowerment of citizens. Very timely conversation. John, have you got presenter rights now?
Yes, I have.
You just tap on the top tab, which is the other one.
Which one am I talking about?
That one, yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, John.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dominic, and thank you very much for the invitation to actually come and speak to you. I'm gonna, I think I'll use the word muse actually on a number of different things, particularly around the democratization of AI and the empowerment of citizens. And I'm really gonna talk about data, I think, more than anything else, and the value of data, and particularly with regards to what that means for the NHS and what that means for us as citizens. So in my day job as an academic, I use a lot of data, and I'm involved in a number of different projects, such as the Healthy Research Centre, the FAR Institute, Connected Health Cities, all from the University of Manchester. And just to contextualise a little bit for you, this is really the focus of where my day-to-day research sits. So if you look at this triangle, generally, the bottom edge of it, the interaction between the healthcare professional and the doctor is direct care as we know it today. But then if we introduce an algorithm, a machine, some artificial intelligence into this process, then we end up with actually a triangle and 3 sides. And so the interaction between the machine and the healthcare professional is typically what we would term decision support today. And actually there are bits of this that go on already, but it's not particularly widespread. And then the other side of the triangle is actually the interaction between the citizen and the patient and the machine as well, for decision, self-management, self-report, adherence. And this side of it, although you're starting to see lots of research around it, this is not widespread either, actually into clinical practice. And from an academic perspective, I'm really interested in that box at the top that has an algorithm or some intelligence, some device, some computational algorithm. And I'm interested in it from the original, the standard healthcare perspective of working out whether these technologies are both efficient, effective, safe, acceptable and equitable, and the tests we apply to any kind of intervention, procedure, device that we introduce into the healthcare system. And there are a number of different challenges around this, but that's probably a talk for another presentation, because today I want to focus around the democratization of AI and how we use data within the healthcare system to deliver AI. So I think one of the first people to actually coin the term democratization of AI was Elon Musk. And his quote here is quite interesting. And I'll read it out. It becomes a very unstable situation if you've got any incredibly powerful AI. You just don't know who's going to control that. It's not that it will develop a will of its own right off the bat. The concern is that someone may use it in a way that's bad. So we must have democratization of AI technology and make it widely available. And that's the reason that we made OpenAI, to help spread out AI technology so it doesn't get concentrated in the hands of a few. I think there's a number of interesting things about this statement, and clearly Elon Musk is projecting into the future of what many would term generalized superintelligence, where actually the machines become more powerful than we are. But it's also interesting from around the term democratization of AI technology. It is interesting because AI really requires three things to make it successful. The first of those is the computational infrastructure. The second of those is actually the methods, so actually what kind of machine learning algorithms are you going to use. And the third one of those is actually the data. But I think here Elon Musk is really talking about spreading out the methods, and this is what he has through the OpenAI. And there's no regard here to the data and the data that actually powers all of AI. And just to think about what he's really talking about here, well, he's talking about the nightmarish future which him and other commentators such as the late Stephen Hawking have been talking about, where actually generalized superintelligence starts dictating to us what we should do and actually assumes control. It's interesting to read various different commentators on this. There are some that think that the exponential push of technology will make this happen quite soon. There are some that are very skeptical that it could ever happen at all. However, this overall concern about generalized superintelligence and what I think we would term more machine learning has caused enough concern that we actually find the establishment of something or the Partnership on AI. So the Partnership on AI, if you're not familiar with it, was actually coming together of various large companies in this space, such as Google, DeepMind, Microsoft, Facebook. I think really was set up, well, you can see what the aims were, why it was set up. And I'll just read out their tenets as well. So we believe that artificial intelligence technologies hold great promise for raising the quality of people's lives and can be leveraged to help humanity address important global challenges such as climate change, food inequality, health and education. So I think you see there really that's a move by the industry to actually say, actually we need to put out positive messages, positive stories around artificial intelligence. And you see this in their goals and objectives: develop and share best practice, provide an open, inclusive platform for discussion and engagement, advance public understanding, and identify and foster aspirational efforts in AI for socially beneficial purposes. So you can see here that I think there is concern across the industry, the large techs, that actually the perception of AI may not be the right one that they're hoping within the general population. And this, I think, is an organisation that's been established to counteract that potentially negative perception. Then if we talk about another example of people who are democratizing AI, well, this is Microsoft, and they also use this term, democratizing AI for every person and every organization. And if you read through their four-pronged approach in terms of what they're actually planning on doing, well, I mean, it's quite interesting. So harnessing artificial intelligence to change how we interact with computers. They're going to put artificial intelligence into all their different devices. We're going to enable intelligent capabilities in their applications and make those available to everybody else. And they're also building the world's most powerful AI supercomputer, which everyone will get access to as well. So in this sense, it seems that Microsoft's definition of democratizing AI means actually they're going to make available these tools to everybody through their own products. And again, I don't think they're talking about data here. I think they're talking about methods, and I think they're talking about compute capability. So it's interesting in terms of what they mean by democratizing AI. Does it mean equal opportunity, or does it mean an equal say in how these things are developed? So I think very much it's the equal opportunity aspect that they're focusing on. So I thought about democracy a little bit, and I went back to, I suppose, what is Tony Benn's most famous achievement, the 5 powerful questions that you can ask in terms of a democracy, or what the features of a democracy are. So these are, I'm sure you're probably familiar with them. What power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? I think when you think about these in terms of in the future of generalized superintelligence, is this a mechanism that we want to apply and should apply to actually regulating the AI industry? So I'll just leave that there for you to think about as I go through the rest of the talk around data. Artificial intelligence itself, and particularly neural nets, where most of the excitement exists these days, thanks to the rise of deep learning, is not a new thing actually. So this has been at least 70 years in the making, starting off from the 1940s, McCulloch and Pitts, through the 1950s, Rosenblatt, then through to Minsky and Papay, Rummelhouse and Hinton and Williams, coming up to the present day again, where we get to the deep learning that was pioneered again by Geoff Hinton. So actually, these things haven't actually happened overnight, although the breakthrough in deep learning means that we are now starting to get to a point where algorithms can outperform humans, and this is a really well-known example, Estiva from Nature, and a deep learned neural network that was able to separate out or diagnose various different skin carcinomas and outperform the humans. So we are certainly in limited scope, limited application, at the point now where AI can outperform humans. And this is really, again, the 3 important parts of artificial intelligence and what makes it special. So we have compute technology. So the rise of the GPU originally came from improving performance from video games. Actually gives you very high density, high capacity compute capability at a relatively low cost. Actually translating those into cloud provision makes it accessible for all. Then we have the methods. So machine learning algorithms, well, they've been in development, as I said, for about 70 years. They're generally published across academic papers, and actually they're generally encoded in all sorts of different tool sets, including lots of open source. So I can go and download TensorFlow or Scikit, and I have access to the machine learning algorithms straight away. So the barriers for entry into AI is not computing technology, it is not the methods, because those are freely available and commoditized and can be accessed very cheaply. It's actually the data side of things. And so the big data explosion that we've had over the course of the last 10 years is really the key to AI, and actually this is where the value is in AI itself. It's actually the data. So when we think about democratizing AI, do we mean actually that we want to democratize access to the data? Because actually, as I said, the data is where all the value is. We think about actually accessing data, and particularly in the UK and across the NHS, well, it's always an interesting interplay between the users of data and the citizens and the patients who actually produce data. So a couple of examples, going back a little bit, the Care.Data programme, which, as I'm sure you know, was the effort by NHS England, NHS Digital, to bring together all data across the NHS into a single data warehouse, which failed. And it failed because of the public reaction to the government's desire to do this. And if you look a little bit deeper into why it failed, there were three really important tests that it failed on. One was reciprocity. So there was no notion that actually Care.Data would get anything back to the populations. Two, it wasn't clear in whose interest Care.Data was being established. Was there actually really a reason that was for the public good? That was unclear. That's partly a communications issue. And then the third one was it wasn't clear that Care.Data would not be used for private gain. And so you can see that actually you need to be very careful around the use of data that you meet these three tests, otherwise you're unlikely to succeed. More recent example that's caused a lot of furore is Cambridge Analytica, the Facebook, where actually data has been used without people really understanding how it's going to be used, and actually that's had an undue influence in the political sphere. And actually, all of these things were taken around over the years, actually end up producing in the public's mind a very negative perception about people who want to use data, and ends up building a real lack of trust about using data and data for the public good. And I think in terms of AI, clearly there are potentially societal benefits here, but how do we ensure that actually these benefits accrue to society? If you look at this on a political dimension as well, so this year these pronouncements have been made, so you may have seen these. So Lord O'Shaughnessy, who's part of the Office of Life Sciences, is frequently has frequently espoused that actually the UK can be a world leader in AI if NHS data can be tapped, and he's actually likened NHS data to a sovereign asset. Then across in the House of Lords, Lord Mitchell has raised the alarm that actually the NHS data is a real asset, and we're potentially sleepwalking into a future whereby the data is given away to big tech, and we fail to realise the value from this data. Just to give you an example of what a sovereign asset actually looks like. So Norway, in the 80s and 90s, used their share of the North Sea oil boom to create a sovereign wealth fund, which is currently valued at, and I got this from the internet this morning, I have a nice little ticker that, on their front page that shows you what it's worth, currently valued at 18 trillion Norwegian kroners, which is about 900 billion pounds. So actually, if you think about this in terms of what data might be worth, well, that's a commodity, oil, that's driven a revolution in society. Is there a parallel to be drawn with AI, and particularly AI in healthcare? It might not get up to 900 billion, but is this the kind of thing that we need to think about when we're thinking about how we use NHS data and how we embed it and work with companies generating AI based off that data? So I think there's also a tension here as well in the direction that we might go in. If you think on one side you have the advocates of open data, and I've just picked on the Open Data Institute because it's fairly well known, that say actually, well, if we just make all the data open with the appropriate privacy and confidentiality guards embedded in it, then actually that will do more to stimulate the economy than actually if we try to monetize this data. The other thing is, at the moment as well, on the other side of this, we have NHS entering into partnership arrangements on a trust-by-trust basis, pretty much, with various players in this. I've picked on DeepMind Health and I've picked on IBM Watson because they're probably the best known examples, but there are all sorts of different partnerships going on as well. So which is the right model here? Is it to just open up our data across the NHS and have a free-for-all? Would you do that internationally, or would you restrict that to UK-based companies? Or should we continue with the model that we have, where actually we're entering into individual partnerships with companies on an individual NHS trust basis? Or do we take Lord O'Shaughnessy's view, and actually this is a sovereign asset, and build a sovereign wealth fund around it? Just to raise more questions about how we might do this as well. So there are a number of different initiatives across Europe, and I've picked two out around the concept of a health data co-op. These are interesting ideas where actually individuals come together to actually monetize or sell their data as a collective organization, and they collectively make decisions and they collectively accrue the benefits. I'm not sure these things have been entirely successful, but as an idea, they certainly have have gained mindshare across Europe. So this could potentially be a model for us. And then finally, well, we need to think about what this means for the country in terms of the social contract. So going back all the way to Rousseau, the philosopher who first espoused the principle of the social contract. Well, we already kind of have a social contract as well in place around the NHS Constitution. Do we need to be clear in the NHS Constitution how we will use data and how we will use it to generate new artificial intelligence products, but actually under what circumstances should that data be used? What can citizens expect from the use of their data? And how will we actually seek to extract value from the users of that data, not just in a one-time basis, but on an ongoing long-term basis when the value accrues? So I'm not going to answer these questions. I'm going to leave them for discussion. But basically, the things that I touched on during the course of the presentation is what exactly does democratization of AI mean? So we would right to be kind of suspicious about companies, I think, saying they're democratizing AI. Well, actually, unless you democratize data, have you actually democratized AI at all? Then I think we need to understand more carefully whose data is it anyway? Who does it belong to? Who should accrue the value from that data? Then I think the other question is, well, how do you actually value that data? And when you're entering into partnerships with companies developing AI, what kind of contract business model should be established to ensure that the benefits of the AI, the value in the products, which potentially could be sold worldwide, large amounts of money, actually accrue back to the UK. And so this, in a sense, is how do we empower citizens so that we all collectively make a decision on how that AI data should be used. So that's my final slide. I'm really interested in opening up the discussion and hearing your thoughts on this issue. So thank you very much indeed.
John, thank you very much. Definitely flagged off a lot of more questions that I even had at the start. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for sharing that. It looks like a number of people have got some questions in the chat. Some stuff around the Constitution as well. Lynn, do you want to talk about that a little bit and what you're thinking about that, or anybody else want to come in and talk about some of the points that they raised? I think it might be worth just going back one of your slides, John, to the questions.
Yeah.
This is the Constitution, yeah. Let me unmute you, Lynn, 1 second. Sorry, I thought I had. Go for it. Hi, Lynn.
Okay, thanks. No, I just thought it was a really interesting observation and comment from John, because we have a huge issue in health and social care, as all our colleagues on the call are aware of, and a renegotiation of the citizen-state social compact is very overdue. And in fact, Jeremy Hunt wrote an article, I think yesterday, which seems to resonate with that, which is interesting. And I know that the NHS Constitution is being rewritten. Colleagues may be better cited on it. It either has been or is being. And so there were both vehicles, and actually this whole concept of democratization of AI could very well feed into that. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks. So I hadn't seen Jeremy Hunt's statement, actually, so that's interesting. I will try and dig that out. And I also wasn't aware the NHS Constitution was being written, so that's been really helpful for me to learn those as well. I will actually follow up on those.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, John. Anybody else want to come in with a question?
So I'm going to quickly just mention a tweet that was sent out last year, just over a year ago, where Simon Graindorge suggests that it would be great to see the NHS owning and leading, not lots of little local consortia plus lots of private academic, etc. interests. How hard can it be? ? So that I guess that's just another provocation in the space as we're all addressing this sort of complexity of questions. John, I don't know if you might be inclined to respond to that notion of, well, I think that.
Yeah. So I think there's a fundamental here, which is actually the more data you have, the more powerful it becomes, and the more value there is in it. Right. So actually, if you harness the whole of the NHS data, it becomes actually incredibly valuable. If you establish point solutions, individual relationships with individual trusts, it has some value, but it doesn't have as much value if you had all the data together. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is just to comment on how hard can it be. Wow, really, really hard is the answer to that. And I think if you look at something like care.data, it proves just how hard it actually is. It is not impossible, well, at least impossible in the way that it was done when it was tried like that. And part of the problem here is that the conversation has not been had with the population. It has not been demonstrated how to do a typical arrangement, how this would ultimately feed into improved health and social care services, how people are going to benefit, how it's in the public good, and how it's not just private gain. And that's what needs to be addressed. And it needs to be addressed now, so this is very timely, before we do sleepwalk into lots of different relationships on an ad hoc basis with some tech companies that actually don't provide back the value that we need. And yes, the system has to act as one to extract, not to necessarily extract, but to ensure we recruit the value from the whole data of the whole of the NHS.
Thank you, John. So I've got other questions, but I want to make room for other people. I'm sure Dom is able to swiftly open up someone's voice channel.
Yeah, Loy, I think what you're saying is quite important as well about the incredible messiness of the data. Would you like me to unmute you for a second? Go for it.
Hi, Dominic. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. For my sins, during the time of the national program, I was working at BT, and I spent quite a lot of time with the spine team and the people who manage the secondary users' data. It is really hard to manage that data, and we had a team of about 30 people just to keep that service running. So you can imagine how difficult that must be, how expensive it is. The second thing we did was we thought of care.data before Tim Kelsey and his people did. And we did a survey of NHS trusts to try and find out how many systems are there in a typical NHS trust that hold patient identifiable data. And we found that it was an average of 180 different systems that didn't talk to each other, but they had patient identifiable data. So when we think of NHS data, it's not one database, it's a huge variety of databases. If you go to talk to the IT heads of big trusts like UCL or the Imperial, the number of IT systems that has patient data approaches nearly 1,000. I find that number difficult to believe, but it might be true.
Yeah, I don't find it difficult to believe, actually. Certainly in Manchester, there are some big hospitals that have systems that hold personal identifiable data approaching 1,000. So NHS data kind of, in my mind, fits into two different camps. There is primary care data from the GPs that actually has been digital for a long time now, probably 20, 25 years, and has followed a consistent coding scheme through that time, or at least changes to the coding scheme have been managed. And I think that's really where the value of the data actually is in terms of the NHS. It's primary care data. And it's a unique asset because you will not find that kind of data for the whole population anywhere else in the world at that kind of scale of the UK population. And I think
Can I interject there? So regarding the GP data, it used to be the GPRD and now it's the CPRD. I was at the House of Commons launch event for the CPRD where exactly what you were saying, other people were saying that this is a great asset and we can use it. And the guy who headed Quintiles, the clinical research organization, he stood up and said, we've tried using GPRD for many, many years and we found it really hard to cleanse the data and make sense of it. In the end, they could make sense of only between like 15 to 20% of the data. The rest of it was quite difficult for them to access and use. And he said it was a real tragedy that Quintiles, being a British company, eventually had to relocate most of its data analytics and research work to Poland because the data there, although the data sets were smaller, they were a whole lot cleaner and they could actually work with it.
I mean, I'm certainly not claiming that this.
All I'm saying is, yes, we have the potential, but we should also be conscious of the challenges we have ahead of us. It's not a simple problem to solve.
So I agree with you. I mean, I've used primary care data throughout my research for a long time, and it has its challenges and it has its problems, but I think it still represents the largest collection of coded healthcare records for a consistent population over a very long period of time that you can't find anywhere else in the world. And I don't think the challenges of the quality are insurmountable either.
And maybe you can use AI as well as giving patients access to their own data, like a two-pronged approach to clean up the data.
Certainly, and I have PhD students who actually work on that very topic as well, how you can actually infer where data is wrongly coded, wrongly collected, where missing data can be imputed. So there are approaches for dealing with this issue.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, John. Was there anybody else wants to come in? We've got about just over 10 minutes. Getting into some of the meat about the structures of the NHS and how things have changed since over the last decade or so.
So I've got two questions just John, data that isn't patient identifiable, so for example, job descriptions, I wonder if you could respond on your perspective of the viability of freeing up non-PID or patient identifiable data for a sort of public interest AI is one question. And the second question is around any the best sort of places to look for estimations of the value of data in the NHS. It's quite difficult to build evidence-based arguments.
Yeah, okay. So the possibility of using other data sources. So once you step outside the world of structured or coded data, it becomes challenging again, because you're really starting to have to look at natural language processing, text mining to make sense out of it. And actually this is a rapidly advancing field as well. It is, I suppose, a subfield of artificial intelligence. And just to go back to the coding of data and the fact that it's all messy, well actually, if you look across secondary care, if you look across mental health, if you look across social care, you'll find that most of the data there is what you would term narrative data, so it's written in natural language. And so extracting data from that becomes a challenge, but it is one that's rapidly becoming more feasible. So I think this is, again, another big opportunity. And of course, because it's not personally, well, the things like job descriptions that you mentioned are not personally identifiable, then it's a lot easier to use because the information governance around that, it doesn't come into play. But with narrative data from healthcare records, obviously that information governance does come into play. And some of the challenges around natural language processing, text mining, are also around, well, how do I ensure that actually, if I use those techniques, I can keep the data anonymized. So there's some challenges around that. Then the second question that you asked is, how do you go about valuing NHS data? And I think that this is practically impossible in a way, because we have no benchmarks. So in the talk I presented, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, which obviously 900 billion seems a little high for valuing some data maybe, but it's difficult to say where it will go. So I think we just need to be very smart about who bears the risk for undervaluing or overvaluing data, and make sure that when we enter into contract partnerships, we don't take on all the risk that we've undervalued the data, and actually that risk gets shared and spread between the NHSs, the supplier of the data, and whoever else might be the user of the data that generates AI technologies.
I agree.
Thank you, John.
So we're coming towards the end of the session. If anybody has any burning questions, please let us know. John, thank you very much for jumping into some of those questions. I think I'd like to add a point here, which is, I think, you know, as a community, if we take off our organizational hats, we all appear to be saying very similar things about how we can work well together and share some best practice. And I think that's where, you know, opportunities like this, either on open platforms like this or over a coffee, is where we can start understanding more about how we can work across the sector to shape and share. And I think, yeah, Lynn's saying a few things as well. Does anybody want to jump in on the last few minutes and add any other comments? I think this bit about the democratization of AI and how the technology companies are positioning things is very interesting, John.
I'd like to just quickly note that one thread of conversation in the chat channel has been around the sort of male dominance historically in this field, and to me it's notable that we have quite an equal split, it seems, of men and women in this sort of community conversation that's going on today. And I'd like to sort of target an invite to to female colleagues in this space, Lynn, thank you very much for sort of speaking, but it is too normalised that male voices are sort of heard most often and most loudly. So while we have got what seems to be quite an equal participant mix, I wonder if it might be an opportunity to have a bit of sort of positive discrimination. Yeah, I'm sure you guys understand where I'm coming from with that. But also no pressure. I appreciate that people are on their lunch breaks also. I wonder, we do have 2 or 3 PPI leads in this space, and John, could you sort of speak to the equalities issues, particularly around patient and public involvement? In your experience, do you think that the trends are sort of moving towards a more equitable and inclusive conversation? I did hear the other day that there's actually less women working in tech now, that there is a sort of negative curve, which concerned me somewhat. In Bristol, we have a number of sort of women coding groups, etc.
So it's an interesting question. I think, I can only really speak from academia, which is where I work. And I think in this space, it has been traditionally male-dominated. So I think it comes from computer science, which has been traditionally male-dominated. But I know there are it's probably still largely dominated, male-dominated. But increasingly, I see women in much more prominent roles than previously. And I think also across the NHS as well, if I look across CIO positions, for example, I see a greater gender balance there as well.
Thank you. I think this is a really interesting conversation. It's probably one that needs its own space, and I know that there are colleagues who are actively working on this. I know that Maxine from One Health Tech is doing some great work on this, and the organisation WeWork are doing some as well. Conscious of your time, John, conscious that we finish on time as well. I personally want to thank you very much for today's session. I think I know that I've got to go and figure out some of the answers to some of these questions, and it's an ongoing debate. I know that there are some organisations currently doing some independent research on what this ecosystem looks like, which we'll more than happily share out in the regular newsletter. So I'd like to thank you, those of you who have joined today's session as the first time. This is a monthly, first Wednesday of every month session. If there is something you would like to discuss or bring to the table, please connect with Sophie, John, or myself. I would be happy to discuss it. As always, this is an informal conversation about how we can keep sharing what it is that we're working on and what's going on in the system. John, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for your continued leadership in this conversation as well. I want to thank you very much for today's session. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube, please connect with us on the newsletter, and feel free to message us on Twitter using the hashtag AI community, and we look forward to keeping the conversation going. Have a great bank holiday, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the best, guys. Thank you.